What drives a 12-year-old child to commit one of the most brutal murders in British history? It's a question that shakes the foundations of what we think we know about innocence, childhood, and evil itself. Imagine a young girl, barely in her adolescence, capable of an act so horrifying that left seasoned investigators questioning everything. This is the story of Sharon Louise Carr, a name that still sends chills through anyone who hears it. Dubbed the Devil's Daughter by the press, her crimes were not only shocking because of their brutality, but because of who committed them. At just 12 years old, Sharon cemented her place in history as the youngest female murderer Britain has ever seen. But her story doesn't end there. It twists and turns into something more heinous, leaving a trail of violence and unanswered questions that haunt those who study the case. On a summer night in 1992, an 18-year-old girl named Katie Ratcliffe left a nightclub, unaware that her life was about to end in unimaginable horror. The attack on her was vicious, 32 stab wounds that stunned even the most hardened investigators. At the time, no one could fathom that a child was responsible. But Sharon wasn't just any child. Her life, marred by violence and chaos, seemed to fester into something monstrous, erupting in one of the most heinous crimes ever committed by someone so young. And her actions didn't stop there. From her haunting diary entries to her violent outbursts in prison, Sharon's story is one of unrelenting darkness. Stay with us as we unravel the events leading to that fateful night, the disturbing signs in Sharon's life that were ignored, and the shocking confessions that revealed the depth of her depravity. Make sure to stick around until the end, because the twists in this case will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human behavior. And as you watch, we want to hear from you. What do you believe causes someone so young to commit such unimaginable acts? Was Sharon born with a darkness she couldn't control, or was she a product of her environment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. It was an ordinary Saturday night in Camberley, Surrey, on June 7, 1992. The streets were alive with the sounds of young people laughing and chatting as they spilled out of pubs and clubs, eager to enjoy the warm summer evening. Camberley, a quaint town known for its quiet neighborhoods and bustling high street, was the kind of place where residents felt safe walking home after a night out. Katie Ratcliffe was an 18-year-old woman with her entire life ahead of her. Friends described her as kind-hearted and full of dreams, someone who carried a bright energy wherever she went. That night, she'd been at Ragamuffin's nightclub, a popular spot for local youths. She spent the evening dancing with friends, laughing, and making plans for the future. Around midnight, as the music faded and the crowd began to thin, Katie decided it was time to head home. She said her goodbyes and stepped out onto the quiet streets, unaware of the shadow that would follow her into the night. Katie's walk home should have been uneventful. The distance was short, the route familiar. But someone, was waiting for her. Somewhere along that journey, she was approached by a figure who struck without warning or hesitation. Her body was found the following morning, discarded on a patch of grass near a footpath. What investigators discovered was nothing short of horrifying. Katie had been stabbed 32 times, her body bearing the signs of a frenzied and unrelenting attack. The wounds told a story of rage and violence, of someone who had no intention of stopping until their darkest impulses were satisfied. The scene was chaotic, a mess of blood and torn clothing. Her injuries suggested a deep-seated hatred, though police struggled to find any motive that connected Katie to her killer. There was no sign of robbery, no evidence of sexual assault, just the unexplainable savagery of the crime. At first, investigators believed they were searching for an adult male. The sheer ferocity of the attack led them to assume the perpetrator must have been a man, likely someone with a history of violence. Officers interviewed countless people who had been in the area that night, combing through witness statements and CCTV footage. They followed every lead, but nothing seemed to make sense. Katie's murder felt random, the kind of tragedy that leaves entire communities reeling. As days turned into weeks, the case began to grow cold. Katie's family and friends were left with no answers, only the unbearable weight of their loss. Her name faded from headlines, replaced by the next story, as time moved forward without justice. Yet, somewhere out there, the person responsible for her death continued on as though nothing had happened. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Could anyone have predicted this tragedy, or was it truly the result of randomness? And what would compel someone to take another life with such brutality? The story of Sharon begins far from the quiet streets of Camberley, in the Central American country of Belize. Born into a life marked by poverty and instability, Sharon's earliest years were very humbling. Her parents' relationship was fraught with turmoil, their household filled with arguments that often turned violent. It was a world where chaos was the norm, and Sharon, even as a child, was no stranger to the darker sides of human nature. One event from her early years stands out, a moment that seemed to foreshadow the troubling path she would later take. During a heated argument between her parents, her mom poured a boiling fat on her dad, its contents causing severe burns and leaving scars, both physical and emotional. For Sharon, the incident was more than a traumatic memory. It was a snapshot of the volatile environment that shaped her formative years. In search of a better life, her family eventually left Belize and moved to England. At first, it seemed like a chance for a fresh start. Young Sharon appeared polite and sociable, adapting quickly to her new surroundings. Teachers and neighbors initially saw her as a cheerful and energetic girl, someone who could easily charm those around her. But as time went on, her behavior began to change. The once sweet and amicable child became increasingly disruptive and aggressive. At school, she started to lash out at classmates and teachers alike. Her once engaging demeanor gave way to a volatile personality that many struggled to understand. As Sharon entered her preteen years, she developed a fascination with older boys, often seeking their attention and approval. This obsession seemed to fuel her growing defiance of authority. She became more rebellious, testing boundaries at every turn. Her relationships with her peers grew strained, and her antics at school became a source of concern for educators. The situation at home wasn't much better. Her parents, already struggling with their own issues, found it increasingly difficult to manage Sharon's behavior. At one point, she was briefly placed in foster care, an experience that seemed to further alienate her from the stability she desperately needed. By the time Sharon was 12, her reputation had taken a sharp turn. She was no longer seen as the friendly girl from Belize, but as a disruptive and unpredictable presence in her community. Those around her were beginning to notice a pattern of escalating behavior, though no one could have predicted just how far it would go. Her early life raises difficult questions about the influence of environment and upbringing. Did the instability of her childhood shape her actions, or was something more intrinsic at play? Whatever the answer, the transformation of Sharon from a struggling child to Britain's youngest female murderer is a story that continues to baffle and disturb those who hear it. Every time you watch without subscribing, you miss the chance to support content that takes countless hours to research and create. If you've made it this far, it means you value the stories we tell. So why not hit that subscribe button? It's free, and it makes a lot of difference. After the horrifying murder of Katie Ratcliffe in June 1992, Camberley, Surrey, was left shaken. The sheer brutality of the crime haunted residents and baffled investigators. Despite extensive police efforts, leads were scarce. No witnesses had come forward, and the violence of the attack led authorities to suspect that an adult male was responsible. With no solid evidence to work from, the case gradually went cold. Meanwhile, Sharon's behavior was escalating. By 1994, she had become notorious for her violent outbursts and erratic tendencies. Her aggression at school reached new heights, and teachers struggled to control her. She was eventually expelled, an act that seemed to further embolden her rebellious streak. It was on June 7, 1994, exactly 2 years after Katie Ratcliffe's murder, that Sharon's dark side revealed itself in a shocking and public manner. Now a pupil at Collingwood College, she had earned a reputation for being a disruptive presence. But what happened that day stunned even those who thought they knew her. During what seemed like a typical school day, Sharon attacked one of her fellow students without warning. Armed with a knife, she stabbed the girl repeatedly, leaving her bleeding and terrified. The randomness and savagery of the attack mirrored the violence inflicted on Katie 2 years earlier, though the victim survived this time. Witnesses described Sharon's demeanor during the attack as disturbingly calm. She showed no sign of remorse or fear, even as teachers intervened to restrain her. Her cold, detached expression sent chills through those who saw it, leaving them to wonder what had driven her to such an extreme act. The aftermath of the attack brought to light even more disturbing details about Sharon's behavior. When questioned about her actions, she displayed an unsettling lack of empathy. She confessed to acts of animal cruelty, boasting about torturing and killing animals in her spare time. Her fascination with violence seemed to go beyond mere anger or rebellion. It was as if she derived pleasure from inflicting pain. These revelations painted a picture of a young girl who was not just troubled, but potentially dangerous. The attack at Collingwood College was a wake-up call for those around her, but it was only the beginning. The threads of Sharon's violent tendencies were beginning to unravel, leading investigators to connect her to something far, a crime that had remained unsolved for 2 long years. Sharon's arrest came as the culmination of a series of increasingly violent incidents that could no longer be ignored. Following the attack at Collingwood College, authorities intervened, initially treating her as a disturbed youth in need of intervention. However, as Sharon's behavior unraveled under scrutiny, it became clear that her violent tendencies went far deeper than anyone had suspected. Placed in a secure psychiatric unit for evaluation, Sharon quickly established herself as a dangerous presence. Her violent outbursts did not subside in confinement. If anything, they escalated. She attacked staff members without provocation and bullied other patients, demonstrating a startling lack of remorse. Her ability to manipulate those around her became evident as she alternated between charm and calculated aggression. While confined, Sharon began to reveal pieces of a horrifying puzzle. Her confessions started casually, as if recounting mundane events, but they soon took on a darker tone. She boasted openly about a murder she claimed to have committed, a murder that sounded eerily similar to the unsolved case of Katie Ratcliffe. Initially, her claims were dismissed as attention-seeking behavior. After all, how could a 12-year-old have committed such a brutal crime? But as investigators delved deeper into Sharon's statements, they uncovered shocking details that had never been made public. Her diary entries were perhaps the most evidence of all. Written in a detached and almost gleeful tone, they described the murder of Katie Ratcliffe in vivid and grotesque detail. Phrases like "I enjoyed it" and "she deserved it" painted a horrifying picture of Sharon's mindset. She described stalking her victim, the thrill she felt during the attack, and the satisfaction of watching her die. In letters and phone calls, Sharon continued to confess, often adding new layers of detail that aligned perfectly with the crime scene. She described the weapon used, the exact number of stab wounds, and the position of the body, details that had been deliberately withheld from the public. Her confessions forced investigators to re-evaluate the case. The notion of a child committing such a heinous crime was almost too much to comprehend, but the evidence was undeniable. Forensic analysis of Sharon's belongings revealed further connections to the murder, solidifying her role as the perpetrator. As the truth emerged, the story of Sharon captured national attention. The sheer audacity of her actions, combined with her age, made her a figure of both horror and fascination. People struggled to reconcile the image of a young girl with the monstrous acts she had committed. The question of how to handle such a young and dangerous offender loomed large. Should Sharon be treated as a child in need of rehabilitation, or was she beyond saving? Her confessions, coupled with her continued violent behavior, suggested that she posed a significant and ongoing threat to those around her. The trial of Sharon was a momentous event in British legal history. It wasn't just her crime that stunned the nation, but the circumstances surrounding it. Her age, her unrepentant attitude, and the sheer brutality of the act. For many, it was difficult to fathom how a 12-year-old could commit such an atrocity, let alone boast about it without an ounce of remorse. The prosecution built its case meticulously, presenting Sharon's graphic confessions, diary entries, and detailed knowledge of the crime scene. These weren't the ramblings of a child seeking attention, but accurate accounts that only the killer could know. The defense argued her age and mental state, suggesting that Sharon's behavior stemmed from a traumatic upbringing and possible undiagnosed psychological disorders. They urged the court to consider her as a child in desperate need of rehabilitation rather than punishment. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. The diary entries proved to be the prosecution's most damning evidence. Sharon's words, written in her own hand, revealed not only her guilt but also a disturbingly calculated nature. She described the murder as though it were a twisted accomplishment, relishing in the power she felt during the attack. These entries left no doubt in the minds of the jury about her responsibility for Katie Ratcliffe's death. The trial reached its climax with the judge's closing remarks, which left the courtroom in stunned silence. He spoke directly about Sharon's motivations, highlighting the sexual nature of her crime, a shocking revelation given her age. He described her as a danger to society, emphasizing that her actions went far beyond mere violence. This was a case of sadistic pleasure, the judge remarked, and Sharon's lack of remorse only compounded the severity of her crime. The jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict, sealing Sharon's fate. She became the youngest female in British history to be convicted of murder, a distinction that horrified the public and legal community alike. Her conviction carried not just a sense of justice for Katie's family, but also a grim realization about the darker corners of human behavior. Journalists debated the implications of the case, questioning whether Sharon's crime was an anomaly or a symptom of deeper societal issues. Experts weighed in on her psychological state, with some calling her a textbook psychopath and others pointing to the potential influence of her chaotic upbringing. For weeks, the trial dominated headlines, sparking heated discussions about youth violence, mental health, and the nature of evil itself. Sharon's story wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mirror reflecting society's fears and unanswered questions. The conviction marked the end of a long and harrowing chapter, but left behind an enduring legacy. Katie Ratcliffe's family finally had justice, but the case continued to haunt the collective consciousness. Sharon's age, her demeanor, and the sheer brutality of her crime ensured that her name would remain etched in the annals of criminal history. For Sharon, life behind bars didn't bring peace or reflection. It became another stage for her escalating violence and erratic behavior. Despite her youth at the time of her conviction, she quickly gained a reputation as one of the most dangerous inmates within the prison system. From the outset, Sharon's interactions with both inmates and staff were marked by aggression. She assaulted multiple officers and fellow prisoners, often with little or no provocation. Reports from prison staff detailed her calculated attacks, which seemed fueled by a deep-seated rage. These were not the actions of someone seeking to defend themselves, but rather of someone who relished inflicting pain and chaos. Sharon's behavior became even more disturbing when she began making bizarre claims about her identity. She told staff and psychiatrists that she believed she was a lizard, born to kill. While some dismissed these statements as manipulative or attention-seeking, others saw them as evidence of a fractured psyche. Her threats to kill were frequent and explicit. She boasted about the pleasure she derived from violence and warned those around her that she wasn't done yet. These threats weren't idle. Prison records show that Sharon continued to plot harm against anyone she perceived as a target. On several occasions, guards discovered makeshift weapons hidden in her cell, sharp objects fashioned from everyday items. These discoveries were reminders that even in confinement, Sharon's capacity for violence remained a constant threat. Her erratic and violent tendencies meant she was frequently moved between institutions. Psychiatric evaluations attempted to unravel the roots of her behavior, but no treatment seemed to curb her outbursts. Some experts argued that Sharon's violence was rooted in deep psychological trauma and untreated mental illness. Others contended that her actions were calculated and deliberate, driven by a predatory nature rather than external factors. Over the years, Sharon made several attempts to downgrade her status, hoping for eventual parole. Each time, her petitions were met with overwhelming resistance. Psychological assessments consistently deemed her too dangerous to release, citing her lack of remorse and ongoing threats as key indicators of her enduring threat to society. The parole boards faced an unsettling challenge. How do you assess rehabilitation in someone who shows no signs of regret or change? Sharon's case was unlike any other. Her youth at the time of her crime made her a unique legal anomaly, but her continued behavior left no room for doubt about her danger. The answer was always the same: parole denied. Sharon Louise Carr remains one of the most complex figures in criminal history. Her behavior raises unsettling questions. Can someone so consumed by violence and instability ever truly change? Or are some individuals beyond rehabilitation? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Sharon's story stands as one of the most unique and unsettling cases in British criminal history. The murder of Katie Ratcliffe and the subsequent revelation that the killer was a 12-year-old girl shocked a nation. Cases involving children committing acts of extreme violence are rare enough, but a female child targeting and killing an adult stranger is almost unheard of. Her actions placed Sharon in the same grim category as other infamous child killers, yet her case remains distinct. Unlike the majority of child criminals, whose victims are often other children, Sharon's choice to attack an adult demonstrated an extraordinary level of premeditation and aggression. Comparisons were drawn to other notorious young offenders, but Sharon's gender and her motive, which was described in court as sexually driven, set her apart in ways that confounded criminologists and the public alike. The cultural impact of her crime has endured, with her name frequently resurfacing in media coverage of similar cases. Documentaries, podcasts, and true crime discussions continue to revisit her story, often with a focus on the psychological and societal implications of her actions. The fascination isn't solely about the crime itself, but about the questions it poses about humanity. What can drive a child to kill? And how does society handle such an anomaly? As true crime continues to dominate popular media, Sharon Louise Carr's story serves as a reminder of the darkest corners of human behavior. Her case prompts discussions not only about the nature of violence, but also about how society deals with those who commit acts so far outside the bounds of what is considered comprehensible. For those who followed this case, the challenge now is to consider what, if anything, could have been done to prevent such a tragedy. Were there signs that society overlooked? Could intervention at an earlier stage have redirected her path? And perhaps most hauntingly, is it possible that no amount of intervention could have changed what happened? If you found this story as compelling as we have, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that explore the darkest and most mysterious corners of human nature. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. There's much more to uncover together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.